I'm like a fat ballerina.
Well, time for my obligatory I love the Bayverse designs when no one else does video. And so for today's video, I'm bringing in everyone's favorite fat ballerina with Hound. Or Detective, as he's known in China. Because this guy really looks like a detective. Hound was introduced into the Bayverse in Age of Extinction, the absolute worst Transformers movie that'll ever exist. Almost everything about this film was a painful slog with boring characters, boring action scenes, boring cinematography, and what wasn't boring was painful. But it did feature some new Autobot teammates who were actually a bit of decent fun when they were on screen. Hound was probably the best one, voiced by the always excellent John Goodman. Hound was an oil-bellied roughneck with a penchant for guns, a big cigar, and was a breath of fresh air in a movie where one of the evil robots was a red bumblebee. Naturally, he doesn't look much like his original design, but it feels more akin to a reimagining of the original. Like, what if Hound were a bit more humanoid and had even more guns? So for today, I have two figures, one made for the kiddies and one made for the big kiddies. And big kitties trapped in taxpayers' bodies. Now, just a heads up, neither of these are from the actual Age of Extinction toy line, mostly because neither of the big Hound figures from that toy line were that great. I do have the smaller Hound figure, and it essentially has only one articulated arm with two stumps for legs and an arm completely hampered by this quick draw gimmick. Car mode's nice though. But I did want to briefly show this thing, mostly because Age of Extinction marked an unfortunate shift for Transformers toy lines. Because whereas toy lines in the past were primarily proper figures with some funky spin-off toys and smaller figures, Age of Extinction was the start of that annoying shift towards dividing up the toy lines, with the proper figures getting much less emphasis compared to the gimmicky, over-limited figures and friggin' one-step changers. And you can definitely tell where more of the focus went because most of the Age of Extinction figures were pretty disappointing. With only the Dinobots and Evasion Optimus Prime being a bright point, unless I'm missing something. But I guess the toy line did well enough that Hasbro has kept up this annoying division with some lines being almost completely geared towards kids, thus having no interesting toys. Looking at you, RID 2015, Allspark and 1. So we'll look at the two for the slightly less egregious, both as a film and a toy line, The Last Night. Starting with Allspark Tech Hound. Now, in comparison to what Age of Extinction was doing, Hound here is definitely a lot more substantial. Not only does he have a size advantage, but he also has a size advantage in the areas that matters, matching the Dadbot Daredevil a lot more compared to his Age of Extinction toys, which tried to muscle him up a bit, which is a bit odd. Given he has a much more rotund body compared to a lot of Transformers and it arguably helped him to stand out, I just like different looks is all. I'm not one of those guys who gets a little too into body representation. We need more fat characters, man. I mean, yeah, they can be cool. I want visible varicose veins, some big flabby muffin tops, and throbbing fupas. I want their stomachs to practically jiggle anytime they walk, man. Like, I want them practically inflated, man. It's something we should all be shooting rope to. That's what we need. Get out of my life. Sadly, Allspark Hound here has a ton of paneling going on, which is just ugly and rather cumbersome. Like, you never know exactly how to hold it. Not helping matters is he feels really cheap. Like, all these joints feel incredibly loose, and he was brand new out of the box when I got him. Shame too, because his articulation isn't the worst. Like, he can actually pull off some fat ballerina positions despite all this shell. But you have to be careful, otherwise it'll fall apart. Now then, the thing is with these more kid-oriented figures, they typically had some wacky gimmicks. But unfortunately, Hounds doesn't work. Oh, not because it's broken, but because you need another figure to make it work. The Allspark Tech namesake is due to this slot on his chest where you put the Allspark cube into to activate lights and sounds. And sadly, the cube wasn't included, and it only came with Allspark Tech Optimus Prime, that god-awful attempt at a minion for Transformers, or even worse, an Optimus Prime repaint. Essentially, this figure is DLC for toys. Great. Surely the transformation is great though, right? Nope, not even. It's like those Transformers costumes people make out of cardboard, but whereas those are charming and took a lot of effort as a costume, as a toy, no. The truck isn't even any good. It's almost completely unpainted, and with all the angles, it looks more like a Cybertruck, but not quite as ugly. Look at the underside, it's like a mummy sarcophagus. And I know this is a Transformer for younger kids, much like Fast Action Battlers for the first 3 movies, but those figures had much better articulation, decent vehicles, and oh yeah, gimmicks that didn't require another figure to work. Even his feet are out there flapping in the breeze. And you know what the worst part was? This was apparently $15 on release back in the day. Granted, that is a lot cheaper than a lot of deluxes were at the time, but that's still a lot, especially given he doesn't come with any weapons, despite his love for guns being his main characteristic. So let's see what happens when you double the price in the same line. This here is Premier Edition Hound, and another reason why I opted for these 2 figures for this video rather than the AOE ones. Like I said, the proper figures for AOE weren't very good, but come the last night, they introduced the subline Premier Edition, where essentially they were Studio Series figures before Studio Series was a thing. Aiming for a lot more detail and film accuracy, they were pretty great. And Hound here is no exception. Coming in at Voyager size, he is packing a lot more detail and little touches that really elevate him. Obviously, you got all the fancy Baybot wiring, but now you also got a lot of pouches and weaponry on his person. Absolutely armed to the teeth. You have this amazingly detailed beard, which thankfully still looks robotic with hints of cables and wires. And speaking of his head, his helmet is even removable. And his physique is much more accurate to his film counterpart this time, especially compared to the overly buff muscle man they pretended was him for AOE. The legs are a bit of a letdown though, with some big kibble hanging off the back end, these things pretending to be feet. They were already weird in the movie, essentially being tires that segmented into feet, which I don't know how you would have done in a figure like this, but I wish it wasn't like this. Also, thanks to the kibble, the knee articulation isn't quite as effective as it could be. Shame too, because the articulation is great otherwise, being very flexible like the fat ballerina he is. We've even a little bit of a waist pivot, some wrist action for a bit of gun spraying, and a bit of girlfriend. And speaking of guns, he comes with a total of 4 guns, which is rather nice, and they all attach to him via 5mm pegs and holes. And yes, it's compatible with anything else with those type of holes, including mech tech, so feel free to make your own insane sci-fi bullshit gun. It's funny, you often see people asking for a Studio Series figure of Hound, which honestly, we got one right here. Maybe a bit better paint and some more accessories would go a long way, but it's not far off. And sure, some bits aren't quite as accurate, but hey, like that stopped Studio Series before. The transformation is mostly fantastic. In particular, I love chunking out the body and stretching him out, and it all folds together really well, but I gotta say, getting the arms attached is kind of a pain, because those bandoleros kind of like to get in the way unless they're positioned just right, but that's the only problem really. And this truck, I gotta say, is really impressive. It's somehow smaller than Hound normally is, but in a way that's impressive. Like, how did they manage to fit all of him in there? There's a lot more paneling, but it kind of works in making him look very industrial and rugged. I particularly like the Decepticon kill count on the side. Nice. On the underside, you can see a lot more of the robot body, but honestly, it packs away so nicely throughout anyways. I really don't mind. This is a great version of a Mercedes Unimog with big ol' robot-smashing anti-aircraft guns. So there we go, a not very good figure aimed at little kids, and a really nice figure aimed at bigger kids. I didn't want this to come off as too much of a comparison. I mean, if I did, this would be very much a hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby toy scenario, and I already did a video like that last week. But I just wanted to use them to show the unfortunate division that kinda happened for the movie toy line that still haunts us every so often. And it's a real shame because Premier Edition Hound is great, and Allspark tech could have been something fun for the kids if, it had its own gimmicks. But alas, that's not the case anymore. And now if we want a figure of Elita 1 for Transformers 1, we're gonna have to wait until next year. Piss off, man. Maybe Premier Edition Hound ain't quite that Studio Series quality we know. But honestly, with the plastic he's got, he doesn't feel too out of place with a lot of the early figures, and it was a step in the right direction. So tell me, what do you think of Hound or the toys I featured? Let me know in the comments and please subscribe.
I'm a lead farmer, motherfucker!